Okay, welcome to the Spring 2 Week 3 exam marking video on the exam topic of diffusion. So question 1 tells us we've got a diagram that shows a cell. So we can see around the diagram there's lots of these little circles, and the key tells us that those circles represent oxygen molecules. So one thing I just added straight away is I can see that there are lots of oxygen molecules on the outside. So for HC to represent a high concentration, and then there's not so many inside of the cell, so LC to represent a low concentration. And because this exam is about diffusion, I know diffusion is from an area of high concentration to low concentration, so I've got an arrow showing they're going to move inside. Now, that's going to be relevant later on, but for the first question, it's actually not so important. This is more just about the basics of cells. So we had to use these words to name the structures labeled A and B. So A, this bit in the middle, large object that's going to control the cell, and that is the nucleus. And then B is the object that's separating the inside of the cell from the outside, and that is the cell membrane. Okay, over the page. So again, this is really about the basics of cells. So it tells us it's an animal cell, and we have to say, how can we tell it is an animal cell and not a plant cell? And we have to give two reasons. So really the main thing that we're looking for is what makes it not a plant cell. And we know that plant cells have extra organelles that animal cells don't, and we don't see these in the diagram. So we do not see a cell wall, we don't see a vacuole, and we don't see any chloroplast. So you need two of those three. That is why we know it's not a plant cell, and it must be an animal cell. Okay, now this is where my notes from earlier on become relevant. So it says oxygen will diffuse into the cell in the diagram, and it asks us why, and it says we need to use information from the diagram. So like I showed, there's a high concentration outside the cell of oxygen, a low concentration inside, so that's why the oxygen is going to diffuse in. And then the final part of this, so the cell shown on the diagram is usually found with similar cells. So similar types of cells, draw a ring around the correct answer to complete the sentence. So scientists call a group of similar cells, well, we call that a tissue. So an organ would actually be a group of tissues working together, and a system is lots of organs working together. So similar cells working together, we call it a tissue. Okay, so this first question done. So let's go on to number 2. Okay, so first thing we want to do is really make sure we know what this diagram we're looking at is actually showing us. So gas exchange takes place in the lungs. So it's going to be about the lungs. And the diagram shows us an alveolus. Now that's the singular of alveoli, and it's next to a blood capillary, type of blood vessel that's in the lungs. And the arrow shows us the movement of two gases. Now you can see I've already written down what those two gases are. How did I know this? Well, blood when it comes into the lungs is deoxygenated, meaning that it's got lots of, well, not very much oxygen, but lots of carbon dioxide. And the reason why that is to get the carbon dioxide from the blood into the lungs, so we can then get rid of the carbon dioxide. But at the same time, we are going to breathe in air full of oxygen, so we can then get that oxygen into our blood. So gas A that's going from the blood into the alveolus is carbon dioxide, CO2, and gas B, which is going from the alveolus into the blood, is oxygen. So that's going to really help us with the next parts of the question. So first, we have to draw a ring around the correct answer. So gases A and B, they move by diffusion. So we see this is a diagram of gaseous exchange, and oxygen and carbon dioxide move by diffusion. Can't be any of the others. Osmosis is only about water, and respiration is not a process that helps gases move at all. It's to release energy. Okay, so gas A moves from the blood to the air in the lungs, and gas A is then breathed. That is
carbon dioxide. Okay, then which cells in the blood carry gas B? So we know gas B is oxygen, and we have a particular type of blood cell which is responsible for carrying oxygen, which is are red blood cells.
Now the others don't work. Platelets are there to clot the blood if we get a cut. White blood cells are there to protect us against pathogens. Red blood cells, they're the ones that carry oxygen. Okay, then the next part of this, an interesting calculation. So we're told the average number of alveoli in each human lung is 280 million. So we have 280 million alveoli in each lung, and then the average surface area of 1 million alveoli is 0.25 meters squared. So if we have 1 million, then the surface area is 0.25 meters squared, and we are asked to work out the surface area of a human lung. So just one, okay? Not both human lungs, but just of one. So on the left here, you can see I've just done a little bit of an equation based on the information we're told. So 1 million alveoli, that's equivalent to 0.25 meters squared. But we want to know what's going to be the surface area of 280 million alveoli. So if I want to go from 1 million to 280 million, I multiply by 280. So I'm going to do the same thing to the surface area. I'm going to multiply by 280, which gives me 70 meters squared. And that's the calculation that I did here. 280 times 0.25 to give me 70. Okay, final part of this question. So we're given a specific example about an athlete. So an athlete who trains to run a marathon, and the surface area of each of the athlete's lungs has increased to 80 meters squared, so more than before. So give one way in which this increase will help the athlete. Well, if we think about someone who's trying to run a marathon, during that marathon they are going to need to respire aerobically quite a lot in order to release enough energy to keep going. Now, key thing here is they have to respire aerobically, which means they're going to need oxygen to do that, to carry out that respiration. And if their surface area of the lungs has gone up, then that's going to help, because it's going to mean more oxygen can get into the blood, because, or you could have said alternatively, because more gaseous exchange can take place. So a bigger surface area is going to allow gaseous exchange to happen faster. It's going to allow oxygen to diffuse faster, so we're going to get more oxygen into the blood. So one of those two options will get you the mark. Okay, number 3, a 6-mark question. So talks about diffusion. It's an important process in animals and plants, and the movement of many substances into and out of cells occurs by diffusion. So describe why diffusion is important to animals and plants. And we've got to talk about animals, plants, and then examples of diffusion of named substances. So to get all of the 6 marks here, we need to make sure we follow the instructions. We've got to talk about diffusion in animals, diffusion in plants, and we need to make sure we name some substances. So what I've done underneath is I have laid out the possible points you could include, but I put some headings here. So actually what I'll do is start at the bottom. The first thing I would have done is actually just define what diffusion is, because it never says it in the question, and so it would be a good idea to actually say what it means. So I just gave a definition: the movement of a substance from an area of high concentration to low concentration. And then that's going to get me 1 mark. And then I've got some possible options about what happens in animals and what happens in plants by diffusion. So first point on animals, we need to take oxygen into our cells by diffusion for respiration in order to actually respire. We're also going to take in glucose by diffusion for respiration in our cells. Then 2 other options, so food molecules, and if you said specifics like amino acids or sugars, or I haven't written it, but fatty acids and glycerol, they need to pass from the small intestine into our bloodstream, and that happens by diffusion as well. And then my final point on animals, that any waste products, so you could have been specific and said carbon dioxide or something like urea, they will diffuse out of cells and into the blood. So there's 4 options for how diffusion can happen in animals and why it's important. Then we've got plants. So carbon dioxide is going to diffuse in through the stomata, so they can use it for photosynthesis. Water vapor will diffuse out of the stomata as part of transpiration, and that's helpful because it's going to then pull more water in through the roots. And then, and this was a little bit of a tricky one to get, but we can talk about osmosis, because osmosis is just a type of diffusion, and plants need to use that in the roots to take in water from the soil. So overall, you've got 8 possible ways here to get marks. So you've got 4 things you could have said about animals, 3 possible things you could have said about plants, and then the definition. So to get the 6 marks, you need 6 of those 8 points. Okay, on to question 4.